A modern cargo ship is a staggering physical achievement, a massive mountain of steel driving relentlessly through the open ocean. Looking at these historical docks, it's easy to assume maritime trade is simply a logistical equation of moving cargo from point A to point B. But physical mass and mechanical power are not enough to cross international borders. To operate globally, a vessel requires a recognized identity. International law requires the vessel to be classified as a distinct, registered piece of maritime property before it can be granted the rights of a sovereign entity. This classification allows the ship to function as a floating extension of a specific nation's territory. So while a vessel might appear completely isolated in the middle of the Pacific, it remains bound by a dense, invisible legal tether to a government thousands of miles away. Before a ship can enter the global trade network, it must construct this legal anatomy through the formal process of registration. Understanding this legal framework is the absolute prerequisite for making sense of modern maritime logistics, vetting protocols, and international trade operations. A common misconception about the high seas is that they operate as a lawless void, where trade occurs outside the reach of national governments. In reality, when a vessel enters international waters, it projects a definitive jurisdictional bubble around itself, generated by its registration. This bubble dictates which nation's laws protect the crew and cargo, regardless of physical location. This creates an immediate structural problem. How does a mainland state actually grant this nationality and enforce that sovereign bubble on the other side of the planet? International treaties establish the theoretical right to do this, but the actual execution relies on a highly precise domestic administrative mechanism. To find the origins of this system, we have to look to the mid-20th century, when modern international maritime law was first formally codified. This photograph shows the kind of expansive international assembly where these rules were negotiated. The Geneva Convention on the High Seas in 1958 represented the first systematic attempt to organize maritime jurisdiction on a global scale. The convention established a core mandate. Every individual state possesses the full independent authority to define the specific conditions for granting its national identity to ships. That principle was later reinforced by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, in 1982. These conventions collectively guarantee the right of a registered vessel to fly a specific nation's flag while traversing international waters. This designates that nation as the flag state. Once that flag is raised, the ship is legally bound by that specific state's laws. However, UNCLOS only provides the overarching right to fly a flag. It delegates the actual mechanics of the registration process entirely to individual governments. International law demands that a ship have a nationality, but it is domestic law that actually builds the vessel's legal framework. To see exactly how a nation translates those international mandates into domestic policy, we can examine the legal framework of India. The governing legislation for Indian vessels is the Merchant Shipping Act of 1958, specifically Part 5. Under this act, a ship is defined and treated as property. Similar to registering the title to a piece of land or an automobile, claiming ownership of a vessel requires a definitive official government record. To meet this requirement, the government maintains the Register of Indian Ships, a legally binding ledger created to record the specific type of maritime property. The Act sets strict physical constraints for inclusion in this register.
First, the vessel must be a sea-going ship equipped with a mechanical means of propulsion. Second, there is a capacity limit. The ship must measure 15 tons net and above to qualify for standard registration. Finally, the law imposes a geographic limitation. Registration cannot happen anywhere. It must be processed at officially designated ports of registry. There is an exception. Vessels under 15 tons must still be registered if they operate beyond the immediate coasts of India. Through these specific parameters, the Merchant Shipping Act mathematically translates a massive physical structure into a recorded, verifiable piece of national property. Once a ship is classified as property, the register must structurally define how that property is actually owned. Because modern merchant ships are massive multi-million-dollar assets, it is exceedingly rare for one to be held as a single, undivided asset by one individual. To solve this, maritime law utilizes the concept of shareholdings. Indian maritime law employs a very specific statutory rule for this.
The ownership of an Indian merchant ship is strictly divided into exactly 10 equal shares. These 10 shares function as equity, allowing ownership to be distributed among various corporations, individual investors, or financial institutions. Alongside this division of ownership, the register meticulously records all physical specifications of the vessel itself, ensuring an exact match between the physical ship and the financial asset. The register ultimately creates a precise map of ownership, breaking down a monolith of steel into divisible, liquid financial equity. This meticulous record-keeping serves a critical commercial function well beyond simply tracking who owns the 10 shares. Operating a ship is highly capital-intensive, which often requires owners to take out maritime mortgages against the vessel. The register serves as the official, unalterable evidence of these financial encumbrances. By law, these register books are kept open for public inspection, accessible to anyone willing to pay a fixed fee. This transparency allows vendors, insurers, and charterers to independently verify the true ownership and debt status of a vessel before entering into any business agreements. Consequently, the register provides the foundational layer of trust in maritime commerce. Without this verifiable transparency, the financial risk of dealing with unknown vessels would paralyze global shipping. Completing the registration process changes the vessel's standing within the global administrative system. The immediate benefit is that an officially registered Indian ship gains access to all the privileges and sovereign protections outlined in the Merchant Shipping Act. But those protections come with strict obligations. The registry acts as the state's ultimate tool for regulatory control and financial enforcement. An owner cannot evade legal duties or taxes simply by refusing to register their ship. In fact, one of the primary administrative reasons the registry exists is to guarantee the enforcement and collection of these national dues. This Styx network's rigorous port state controls and international environmental protocols rely entirely on the flag state holding this direct legal leverage over the vessel. While the physical ship moves the cargo, the entry in the register of ships allows that movement to occur within the legal and regulatory boundaries of the modern maritime environment.